And I should be careful because he's also my boss. Rich DeRozier is our moderator. Rich, thanks for having us tonight.
Glad you added that last part. Didn't want you to forget that. Never forget who signs the checks. 1968. A lot of single words or two-word phrases capture 1968. Tet, Vietnam, LBJ, MLK, Plastics, Dustin Hoffman, RFK, Nixon, Chicago, Abby Hoffman, Apollo, Mexico City Olympics, Black Power. So those are some of the words I came up with for 1968. By way of introduction for our esteemed panel, I want to ask them, what do you think of? First word, maybe the first couple words that come to mind for 1968. Mayor Bernabei.
You know, I hate to be trivial about this, and this isn't really the first thing I think about, but I am a wholehearted, deep Cleveland Indians fan. But in 1968, because I went to school at Brown University and many of my very best friends lived in Boston, I will think of the Boston Red Sox who won the World Series in 1967. And in 1968, they competed right down to the final couple of teams. And that's trivial, but that's just to throw us off of all the subjects that you have already said that are all the earth-shattering watershed events that happened in that incredible year. And let's talk about the Red Sox. Well, let's not talk about the Red Sox, but I just want to throw that one out.
Very good. Mr. Vitale, hi there.
How you doing?
How are you?
I'm older than you.
It's been a long time. Talk about 1968. You were just getting started
First year of college.
Music and in the music business, maybe playing in some garage bands or bands that would play on the stage of Timken High School.
Yeah.
Talk about how maybe, you know, again back to kind of the starter question. What do you think of for 1968, and then maybe the influence of music on generations of people?
Quite a bit of changes in music. 68, you mentioned, you know, single words or word phrases. What I think of when I think of 68, one of the biggies in music, that is FM radio in cars. A lot of people don't realize that FM radio all of a sudden was available in cars. Better sounding. You could go under bridges, underpasses, and not lose the signal. Remember that? And much different music than the top 40 AM stations. FM stations were playing full albums and obscure cuts from people that you'd never hear, and it gave the listener, you know, a whole different view. I mean, you always still had around here it was WHLO, the AM top 40, always had that. But the FM stations, there was a whole new thing to get them in. FM was around for a long time, but it was finally offered in cars, and it changed the whole music scene. And the other word I can think of, which I'm not that fond of, but it's part of our musical history, is psychedelic music. That came into fashion then. The Beatles and the British invasion of '64 kind of waned into the California. California took the reins. Luke probably could understand that. He lived in California. California seemed to take control, take the reins, and the rest of us were kind of following what they were doing, and they were really moving towards psychedelic music. The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Buffalo Springfield with their protest songs, and 1968 a group formed called Crosby, Stills and Nash, And 6 years later, I started a 35-year career with them. And I didn't have any idea about that. Most personal to me was that we used to play the song Ohio. And that was all about the protest of the tragedy on May 4th, 1970 in Kent. So it was a bittersweet year I think for everybody. You know, losing Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. I mean, this in Vietnam War, America went through a lot. And I think the music scene then was trying to heal people, and protest songs. There were protests on college campuses, stuff that we had never seen prior to those years. And so I've got good memories of '68. That was good. I do like the fact that FM radio opened a whole huge area of music that was my business at the time. And so that's my 2 cents for now of what I remember about it.
Ms. Powell, how about you? Were you, you know, in mid-1968, people like Dr. Harry Edwards were encouraging African-American athletes to think about whether they wanted to participate in the Olympics in particular and in other venues. Did you, were you aware of that? Did you sense that? And did you have any pressure to examine your participation on the tour?
No, I didn't. I do know John Carlos, though, who participated in the Olympics, and but you know, my words would be tumultuous times, because I was as the second African American female on the LPGA tour, and traveling throughout the country, playing in golf tournaments where actually Althea Gibson, who was one of the greatest female tennis players ever, had joined the LPGA tour before I did, 3 years before I did, and many of our tournaments then were called invitational, so that they didn't have to invite Althea and myself. And we had a terrific tournament director at the time, Lenny Wirtz, who also, he was shorter than I was, but he was a referee in the NBA. So he really understood about inclusiveness and diversity. And it worked for, thank goodness he was the tournament director at the time, because he broke that down and had a meeting with the tour, with all the players, and said, look, this is what's going on. We're going to make some changes, and they're going to have to be tournaments that are going to be called open tournaments. They're going to have to invite everyone. We will probably lose. We will lose some tournaments, but this is how it's going to be. And he made a definite stand, which then allowed either they had tournaments or they didn't have tournaments. And there were a lot of things that were happening as I traveled around the country and traveled through the South, and that was interesting. It was also interesting not only in the South, but also in the North. I ran into situations and not very pleasant things that happened and occurred. And I think the first time I ever received threat letters on my life was in 1960. It was my first full year on the tour. And I thought, wow, you know, somebody's trying to do away with me here in my own country for playing wonderful sport of golf.
That's unbelievable. I want to, at some point, we'll kind of come back to some more of that, but I want to move on to Pastor Arrington at age 14, being influenced by Dr. King. What about some of the other people who were on the scene who were 180 degrees different from the message of Dr. King, the Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael? Were their messages being heard in Canton, Ohio at the time, and did they have any effect on you one way or the other?
Well, I don't know about what messages were being heard in Canton, but in Massa, the two words that I would have would be turmoil and uncertainty. As a young teenager, being involved in the church, and my dad being a pastor, surrounded by pastors, which the church was kind of synonymous with the struggle, and up against it on a number of fronts. And I just remember the rumbling, figuratively, that was becoming more and more amplified in the school system and in the city. The level of unrest was growing, which consequently meant uncertainty about relationships and what was going to happen now, even prior to the assassination, and certainly after the assassination. You're thrown more into a tailspin relative to the turmoil and the uncertainty, because many's hopes were placed on and pointed toward Dr. King. And now that he's gone, what does that mean? And not only on an international and national level, but what does it mean in my own community? And what does it mean to me personally? So I would resolve it right there: turmoil and uncertainty.
Mr. Garrett?
Yes.
Talk to us about being in California in the summer of 1968.
That was probably from May 9th to June 4th, one of the best months of my life. The other 11 months of 1968 were scary, fractured, 18-year-old college student, the draft hanging over your head. Really wasn't a very good year. But May 9th through June 4th was pure magic. And it was pure magic because of one man. And that was Bobby Kennedy, who made a point of being exceptionally friendly, a man of the people, one of the best men I've ever met. His two bodyguards became fairly good friends of mine at the time and took a shine to me. Rosie Greer and Rayford Johnson, exceptional men. And they were his only two bodyguards, as it turns out, along with a guy that I think was from the FBI, which later on I'll get into a little bit. But I would say outside of that 4-week period, it was just the worst year an 18-year-old in college, in Vietnam, could ever experience. Hanging over your head.